I went to the notary's office that morning to revoke my husband's power of attorney. It was supposed to take 20 minutes. But the notary looked at her screen, then looked at me, then looked at her screen again and said, "Mrs. Calloway, are you aware that a property transfer was filed in your name 3 weeks ago?" I didn't even own property in my name. Or so I thought. Let me back up because none of this makes sense without the part that broke me first. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he still legally was, and I had been together for 9 years, married for 6. We met in Edmonton when I was 24 and working at a veterinary clinic in the South End, the kind of place that smelled like antiseptic and wet dog, and somehow still felt like home to me. He came in with a golden retriever that wasn't even his. It belonged to his sister. He'd been pet sitting. He was kept apologizing for not knowing the dog's vaccination history. I told him it was fine. He asked if I see it cough time. I said yes, Bintebi because he had kind eyes and because I was 24 and thought kind eyes meant a kind person. They don't always, I know that now. We got married in a small ceremony outside of Canmore. My younger sister was my maid of honor. My mother cried through the whole reception. His parents drove up from Calgary and his father gave a speech that went 12 minutes too long and everyone laughed politely. It was by any ordinary measure, a beautiful day. For the first few years, things were fine, not extraordinary, fine. He worked in commercial real estate. I'd gone back to school part-time and finished my veterinary technician diploma, then started picking up shifts at a larger animal hospital in the west end of the city. We had a mortgage on a townhouse in Sherwood Park. We had a joint account and separate savings accounts. We had a cat named Biscuit who hated him and adored me, which in retrospect I should have paid more attention to. The cracks started maybe 3 years in. He began working longer hours. He started taking calls in the garage with the door shut. He got cagey about money in a way he never had been before. Not alarmed, just vague. Answering questions with non-answers. "The market's weird right now. I'm moving some things around. Don't worry about it." I worried about it. But I also told myself the story that a lot of people tell themselves in a marriage that's going sideways, that it was stress, that it was a phase, that if I just kept being patient and steady and supportive, things would come back around. I made myself small to fit inside the version of our life he seemed to need. I stopped asking questions because asking questions made him irritable. I stopped talking about my own career goals because they seemed to make him feel competitive in a way I didn't understand. I just kept showing up, to the townhouse, to his family dinners, to our life. Like presence alone could hold something together that was already quietly coming apart. And then, 8 months ago, I found out about my best friend. I had known her since we were teenagers. We'd met in grade 9, bonded over the same terrible taste in music and the same sense of humor, stayed close through university and distance and every variation of adult life. She was the person I called when things were hard. She was the person I texted memes to at 11 o'clock at night. She was the first person I called when I found out my dad's cancer had come back. She had been sleeping with my husband for almost 2 years. I found out the way a lot of people find out about things they weren't supposed to know. An accidental notification. His phone, face up on the kitchen counter, a message preview that appeared before I had any conscious intention of reading it. I stood there for a full 10 seconds before I understood what I was seeing. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs stopped working. I didn't confront him that night. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I said a word. I spent 2 weeks being very quiet and very careful. I called my cousin, he's a paralegal in St. Albert, and told him what I suspected. He walked me through what to document and how. I opened a new personal account at a different credit union. I started moving my direct deposits. I talked to a family lawyer, a woman recommended by someone at work, and she told me clearly and calmly what my rights were and what steps to take before I said or did anything that might tip him off. The day I finally told him I knew, he didn't deny it. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, in almost a conversational tone, "I was going to tell you." I asked him when. He didn't answer. I asked him how long. He said about 22 months. I asked him if he was in love with her. He paused for too long before he said no. That pause was the most honest thing he'd said to me in probably 2 years. He moved out the following weekend. I kept Biscuit. I kept the IKEA bookshelves and the good coffee maker and the print we'd bought together at a market in Victoria that I still couldn't quite bring myself to take down from the wall. I was 31 years old and starting over, and some mornings that felt enormous, and some mornings it just felt like a fact. The way weather is a fact, something you put your coat on and walk into. The paperwork was its own exhausting process. Because we had property together, because we had investments that needed to be unwound, because divorce in Alberta, when one party decides to become difficult about assets, is not a fast or simple thing. It was in the middle of all of that, while I was sitting in waiting rooms and reading documents and learning more about property law than I ever wanted to know, that I first heard about the cabin. My grandmother had died the previous spring. She was 83, sharp until almost the end, opinionated about everything, and she had loved me in that particular way that skips a generation sometimes and lands with full force. She left me something in her will. A piece of land in northern British Columbia, a small acreage outside of a town called Burns Lake that she'd bought decades ago with my grandfather. There was a cabin on it, nothing fancy, but the land itself had become more valuable over time as the area developed around it. I hadn't even thought about it much in the chaos of the marriage falling apart. My lawyer mentioned it during a meeting about asset disclosure, and I remember thinking, right, I need to deal with that at some point. I didn't. My husband had already dealt with it. That morning at the notary's office, I'd gone in to revoke the power of attorney, a routine step my lawyer had recommended. The notary pulled up my file, and there it was. A transfer of beneficial interest in the Burns Lake property. Filed 3 weeks earlier. My name on the document as transferring party, my signature or something that looked like my signature, at the bottom. I had not signed anything, I had not been present, I had not authorized a single thing. The notary was very calm. She said, "I need to stop and be transparent with you. This transaction went through a different office. I'm not in a position to tell you what happened there, but given what you're telling me, I think you need to contact your lawyer right now." I sat in my car in the parking lot for about 15 minutes before I could drive. Then I called my lawyer. She was not calm. She was professional, but she was not calm. She said, "Tell me exactly what the notary said, word for word." I told her. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Don't discuss this with anyone. Don't call him. Don't call her. Come into the office tomorrow morning at 9. That night I sat in the townhouse with Biscuit on my lap and tried to understand what had just happened. Someone had filed a property transfer using my name and what appeared to be my signature. The property was something I had inherited from my grandmother. And the only person who had ever had any legal authority to act on my behalf, the only person who had held my power of attorney, which I had set up years ago during a surgery and never properly revoked, was my husband. The timeline was not subtle once we looked at it clearly. He had filed the transfer 6 days after I told him I knew about the affair. 6 days. Whatever the plan was, he had moved on it fast. My lawyer hired a forensic document examiner. Not cheap, but she said we needed it. The examiner spent 3 days with the paperwork and came back with a conclusion that was about as clear as it could be. The signature on the transfer was not consistent with my genuine signature across multiple verified samples. The pressure patterns were wrong, the letter form proportions were off. The notary who had supposedly witnessed it, at an office in a town 2 hours away from Edmonton, had, according to her own records, no appointment scheduled on that date. Meanwhile, my lawyer made inquiries about the property itself. The transfer had been made to a numbered company. The numbered company, as it turned out, had been registered 4 months earlier. The sole director was my husband's former business associate, a man I'd met maybe twice at Christmas parties and never thought about again. That associate, under pressure from his own lawyer once things started unraveling, confirmed that he'd been asked to lend his name to the company as a favor. He said he hadn't known what it was for. Whether that was true or not, I couldn't tell you. But his willingness to talk made the whole thing fall apart faster. The numbered company had already entered into a preliminary agreement with a land developer out of Prince George. The developer had been looking to acquire several parcels in that area for a resort project. The Burns Lake acreage was one of 3 properties they wanted. The deal wasn't finalized yet, and that, my lawyer told me, was the piece of luck in all of this. Because the developer had done their own due diligence. And their own due diligence included verifying ownership chains. The developer's legal team contacted my lawyer's office about 2 weeks after we'd filed our own complaint with the Land Title and Survey Authority of British Columbia. They had found the discrepancy themselves. They had been about to wire a significant deposit, $240,000, before their title search flagged the transfer as potentially contested. $240,000 for a piece of land I had received as a gift from my grandmother and barely had time to think about. My lawyer called me on a Thursday afternoon. She said, "I need you to sit down if you're not already sitting down." I was standing in the break room at work eating a granola bar. I sat down on a plastic chair next to the recycling bin. She said the developer wanted to proceed with the legitimate owner. She said they were prepared to complete the transaction with me directly. She said the number was real and the timeline was reasonable and I needed to decide if I wanted to sell. I asked her if this was legal. She said, "This is exactly legal. The fraudulent transfer is being unwound. You are the rightful owner, the developer wants the land. The question is whether you want to sell it." I called my mother that night. She cried. I cried. Biscuit walked across my face at some point because he does that when I'm horizontal and upset. Some combinations of curiosity and territorial behavior that I find both annoying and genuinely comforting. I told my mother I didn't know what to do with that kind of money. She said, "You'll figure it out, you're your grandmother's granddaughter." I sold the property. The transaction took 8 weeks to complete. The funds arrived in my account on a Tuesday. I was at work when the deposit notification came through on my phone. I excused myself, went to the staff bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the sink for about 3 minutes just staring at the number. My grandmother had bought that land in 1978 for under $10,000. She had loved it because of the quiet, because of the view of the lake in the early morning, because my grandfather had proposed to her while they were standing at the edge of the tree line watching the sun come up. She had never sold it because it meant something. She had left it to me, because she said I was the one who understood that some things have value that isn't about money. She wasn't wrong. But the money was real too. My husband, my ex-husband, the divorce was finalized 6 weeks after the property sale, had not anticipated that the developer would do a thorough title search. He had not anticipated that a contested transfer would be flagged. He had not anticipated that a forensic document examiner could tell the difference between a forged signature and a real one. He had been moving fast and he had not been careful, and when you forge someone's signature on a legal document and you're not careful, the whole thing has a way of pulling apart thread by thread. He was charged. I won't go into detail about where that process stands because it's ongoing and my lawyer has asked me not to discuss specifics, but I will say, he was charged. That part happened. My best friend, former best friend I should say, though that word still costs me something, I don't know what she's doing now. I don't follow her online. I blocked her the week I found out and I have not revisited that decision. Someone told me a few months ago that she'd moved to Vancouver. I didn't ask for more information. I don't need it. What I will tell you is what happened the morning the money settled. After I left the staff bathroom and went back to my shift, and got through the rest of the day on autopilot, I drove home and I sat with Biscuit, and I thought about my grandmother. About the way she used to make tea in this ancient ceramic pot she'd had for 40 years. About the way she smelled like rose hand cream and slightly like mothballs, which sounds unpleasant but was actually one of the most comforting smells of my childhood. About the way she had looked at me at my wedding, not at my husband, at me, with this expression I couldn't quite read at the time. I think I can read it now. I think she was checking that I was okay. I think she always checked that I was okay. I used a portion of the money to pay off the remaining mortgage on the townhouse outright. I set up a savings structure with a fee-only financial planner. She came recommended by my cousin, the paralegal, who turned out to be very useful in this whole chapter of my life. I took 3 months of my contribution room in my TFSA and maxed it for the next several years forward. I made a donation to the animal rescue organization that had been my grandmother's favorite cause. A real donation, the kind that felt meaningful. I put the rest somewhere sensible where it can grow without me doing anything dramatic. I still work at the animal hospital. I like my job. I like the animals and I like my coworkers and I like being useful in a way that's immediate and tangible. The money doesn't change that. The money just means that I'm there because I want to be, not because I'm calculating how many shifts I need to keep the mortgage current. That's not a small thing. I didn't understand before how much of my energy went into that calculation, How much mental space I'd given over to the kind of low-level financial anxiety that you stop noticing after a while because it's just always there like background noise. It's quieter now. I didn't know it could be quieter. Someone at work asked me last month if I was okay. She's a veterinarian. She's been there for 12 years. She's one of those people who notices things without making a production of it. I said I was actually doing all right. She looked at me for a second the way people do when they're deciding whether you mean it. Then she nodded and said, "Good," and handed me a file, and we went back to work. That was the truest conversation I'd had with someone about all of it. I still have the print from the Victoria Market on my wall. I thought about taking it down 100 times. I left it up because I like the colors, and because I bought it, and the things I chose belong to me, regardless of who I was standing next to when I chose them. That feels important to hold on to. My grandmother's land is gone. Someone will build something on it probably. Resort infrastructure, parking, something like that. But I carry the memory of it the way she carried it. Not as a place I can return to, but as something that existed and mattered and shaped the people who loved it. That's what she wanted me to understand, I think. The value that isn't about money. She just also wanted to make sure I'd be okay. I am, Grandma. I really am.